Hello, my name is Samantha, and I'm here today to talk to you about the writing section of the IELTS test. For the structure and timing of this section of the test, the writing section has 2 tasks, and it takes a total of 60 minutes. So in the last video, we talked about task 1, and so in this video, we're focusing mainly on task 2. So if you haven't seen the first video, you should check that one out first. So for task 2, you will be responding to a question relating to a point of view or an argument, and you should take around 40 minutes to do this section, this task, and you should be writing a minimum of 250 words. For one example of what this section of the test looks like before we get into scoring, here is an example. So you should spend about 40 minutes on this task. Write about the following topic. The first car appeared on British roads in 1888. By the year 2000, there may be as many as 29 million vehicles on British roads. Alternative forms of transport should be encouraged and international laws introduced to control car ownership and use. To what extent do you agree or disagree? And then below the question, it says, give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your knowledge or experience. Write at least 250 words. So we will go through various examples of some of the questions that we could find on this part of the test, but this is something fairly typical. They give you a topic and then they ask you, do you agree or disagree with this statement that they've made relating to that topic? And then they tell you, of course, to write 250 words and to use examples to support your argument. So there will be a lot of opinion questions on this section of the test, but they're not all asking for your opinion. We'll show you some other ways that they might ask questions as well. So this is something fairly typical. So then when we move on to scoring, we will see how you can answer this and how you should focus your answers. So as we discussed in the previous video, there are 4 categories or 4 criteria that the scoring is based on. The first one is task achievement. And again, the scoring is from 0 to 9. So to get a perfect score on this section for this task, then for task achievement, you would need to do these things. So it would have to fully address all parts of the task, present a fully developed position in answer to the question with relevant, fully extended, and well-supported ideas. So you have to do all of those things. So you have to make sure that you really pay attention to the question, and that you're answering the question, and that you are supporting all of your ideas, and that everything that you're saying is relevant to the question. So be sure that you pay very close attention to the questions in this section of the test. They're not quite as repetitive as in task 1, when the actual question that they're asking you is often the same or very similar. Here they ask different things, so pay close attention. For band 8, a score of 8, you would have to sufficiently address all parts of the task and present a well-developed response to the question with relevant, extended, and supported ideas. So very similar to a score of 9, just not quite as perfectly developed and well-developed. So you're still addressing the question that they asked you, and you're being well-developed, but it could be better. For a score of 7, you would have to address all parts of the task, present a clear position throughout the response, and present, extend, and support main ideas, but you may have a tendency to overgeneralize and or your supporting ideas may lack focus. So you're addressing the task, you're being clear, you have main ideas and supporting ideas, but your supporting ideas might lack some focus. They might not be really focused on the point that you're trying to make, or you might be making things very general when you're talking about them. So it needs to be a little more focused. For a score of 6, You would have to address all parts of the task, although some parts may be more fully covered than others. Present a relevant position, although the conclusions may become unclear or repetitive. So you're addressing the task, but you're not doing it fully. Some parts you did better on than other parts. The second point, you're starting to get a little bit unclear or repetitive. And the third point is to present relevant main ideas, but some may be inadequately developed or unclear. So again, you're starting to do all the right things, but you're not following through perfectly. There's a lack of focus or a lack of detail, and you're not explaining things as well as someone who gets a score of 7, 8, or 9. For a score of 5, you would address the task only partially, and the format may be inappropriate in places. So you've kind of answered part of the question, but you haven't done the full thing. Expresses a position, but the development is not always clear, and there may be no conclusions drawn. So you've started to tell them a position, but you didn't fully develop it, and you didn't give a conclusion. And then the final point is present some main ideas, but these are limited and not sufficiently developed, or there may be irrelevant detail. So you don't have enough detail, or you may have details that aren't so important to the fact that you're trying to argue or present. Down to a score of 4, so you would be responding to the task in a minimal way, or the answer could be tangential. The format may be inappropriate. So you are not answering the question very well at all. You might have started to, and in some part of it might be accurate, but it's not fully answering the question. The answer might go off onto a tangent. So you might start to answer a question, but then you lose focus and you start to talk about something else that isn't really relevant, and your development of the topic would be inappropriate or maybe confusing. Second point is presents a position, but this is unclear, so you're not clear. Present some main ideas, but these are difficult to identify and may be repetitive, irrelevant, or not well supported. So you have main ideas, but maybe the reader can't really decide what are your main ideas when they're reading it because it's not so clear, and it might be repetitive. You might be saying the same things over and over. A score of 3 would mean that your writing does not adequately address any part of the task. So you are not answering the question. You do not have a clear position, and you only present a few ideas and they're not developed well enough, or they're not related enough to the original topic. A score of 2 would be that you barely responded to the task, you don't express a position, or you might try to present 1 or 2 ideas, but there's no development at all. And then number 1, the answer is completely unrelated to the task. So you would have to answer no part of the question to get a score of 1. And a score of 0 means that you didn't attend, or you didn't try to write an answer in any way, or you only use some memorized sentences or phrases in your answer. So the next section is coherence and cohesion. Again, starting with the top possible score. So a band 9 score would mean that you use cohesion in a way that it attracts no attention. So it is very cohesive. Everything is feeling very natural, and there's no attention attracted to the way that you're trying to do this. So it just comes out as being natural. It doesn't seem forced when you're trying to make things seem cohesive. And skillfully manages paragraphing. So your paragraphs are skillful. So you've perfectly divided things into different paragraphs. Everything flows, everything works together in a way that feels very natural. For a score of 8, you would be sequencing information and ideas logically, managing all aspects of cohesion well, and using paragraphing sufficiently and appropriately. So you're doing a very good job in all of these areas. It's just not quite as perfect or as natural as the score of 9. For a score of 7, that would mean that you logically organize information and ideas. There's a clear progression throughout, so that's good. You're still being logical and organized, and you can see you start with something and you go through it in a logical way to the end. Uses a range of cohesive devices appropriately, although there may be some under or overuse. So a score of 9, for example, you're using these cohesive devices, these phrases very naturally, and I don't think that you're trying to use them. When I'm reading your writing for a score of 9, I don't think about those things. But here in a score of 7, maybe you're using them too much or too little, so it doesn't feel very natural. And we'll talk a little more about cohesive devices. Presents a clear central topic within each paragraph. So each paragraph has a purpose and it's clear. For a score of 6, you would be arranging your information and ideas coherently, and there is a clear progression, so you can see that you start here and you move through the different parts of your essay clearly. The point 2 is uses cohesive devices effectively, but cohesion within and or between sentences may be faulty or mechanical. So you have tried to use these devices and you've done it quite well, but sometimes it might feel a little unnatural or not quite perfect. And next is may not always use referencing clearly or appropriately. So you're trying to do this, you're trying to reference things, but it's not perfect. And uses paragraphing, but not always logically. So you're using paragraphs, but you're not doing it perfectly. For a score of 5, that would mean that your writing presents information with some organization, but there may be a lack of overall progression. So you have a plan, it's a little bit organized, but maybe you're just giving points, but there's no way to clearly follow it from the beginning of your essay to the end of your essay in a clear way. Makes inadequate, inaccurate, or overuse of cohesive devices. So you're trying to use them, but they're not used properly, or you're just using them far too much. The next point is maybe repetitive because of lack of referencing and substitution. So you're making them feel as though you're saying things too often. And may not write in paragraphs or paragraphing may be inadequate. So if you don't use any paragraphs, you might fall in the score or lower. Or if you're using paragraphs, but it's not divided in the way that it should be, you might see the score of 5. A score of 4 could mean that your writing presents information and ideas, but these are not arranged coherently and there's no clear progression in the response. So it doesn't really make sense the way that you organized things. Next point is uses some basic cohesive devices, but these may be inaccurate or repetitive. So you've tried, but they're not used properly. And then may not write in paragraphs or their use may be confusing. So again, you might have tried to use paragraphs, but it's confusing, or you might not have tried to use paragraphs and it might just be one big section of text. If you get a score of 3 on this section, that would mean that you didn't organize your ideas logically. You were very limited in the types of cohesive devices you used, and it might be illogical. It might not be the proper time to use them, or they might be the wrong words. A score of 2 means that you have very little control of the organization of your entire essay. Number 1 would mean that you didn't communicate any clear message at all. And a 0 would be not attending, not writing the task, or only using memorized phrases or sentences. I'm just going to stop for a drink. Okay, so the next criteria is lexical resource. So for lexical resource, if you got a perfect score of 9, that would mean that you have used a wide range of vocabulary with very natural and sophisticated control of lexical features. Rare minor errors may occur only as slips. So in this case, you're using a wide range of vocabulary and it all feels very natural. And they even said sophisticated. So you're writing in a formal, clear way and you're using words perfectly. Very rare mistakes can happen, but they have to be mistakes that make the reader think that it's just a natural mistake that people can make. Even a native speaker can make mistakes, of course, sometimes, but it can't be a mistake that indicates that you are not understanding the vocabulary properly or a mistake that makes it confusing. For a score of 8, you would have to use a wide range of vocabulary fluently and flexibly to convey precise meanings. So you're using the words really well and it is clear what you are trying to say. Skillfully uses uncommon lexical items, but there may be occasional inaccuracies in word choice and collocation. So here you might be trying to use new words that are not so common, but there are a few mistakes that show that you don't have a perfect understanding of how to use those words or phrases. And then produces rare errors in spelling and or word formation. So you don't have very many mistakes, but they can exist. At the level 8, there can be some errors that exist. If you get a score of 7, that means that you have used a sufficient range of vocabulary to allow some flexibility and precision. So you have enough vocabulary to convey your thoughts, to tell them what you think, but it's not a really high level and a really wide range. You can use some less common lexical items with some awareness of style and collocation. So you can use some words that are a little less common and you're doing it pretty well. May produce occasional errors in word choice, spelling, and or word formation. So you're making some mistakes. For a score of 6, that would mean that you've used an adequate range of vocabulary for the task. So it is enough. You have enough of vocabulary to be able to express your ideas, but it's not a really wide range of words. You might attempt to use some less common vocabulary, but it may sometimes be inaccurate. And you could make some mistakes in spelling or word formation, but it doesn't confuse the message that you're trying to say. If you get a score of 5, it means that you've used a limited range of vocabulary, but it is minimally adequate for the task. So it is okay for the task. It's not great, but you're still just barely covering the task at hand. You may make noticeable errors in spelling and or word formation that may cause some difficulty for the reader. So you're making mistakes and now the mistakes are becoming a problem for the reader. It might be confusing. A score of 4 would mean that you're using basic vocabulary and it might be repetitive or inappropriate. And you don't have very good control of your word formation or your spelling. And your mistakes might make it difficult for the reader to be able to read and understand. For a score of 3, you would have a very limited range of words and expressions with very limited control of word formation and or spelling. And your mistakes are now very severely distorting the message. So your reader is confused. They don't know what you're trying to say so clearly. A score of 2 would mean that you have an extremely limited range of vocabulary, essentially no control of word formation and or spelling. And a score of 1 would be that you can only use a few isolated words. You can't make sentences and convey your ideas in that way. And a 0, you didn't go, you didn't write, or you only used memorized phrases. Okay, the next criteria is grammatical range and accuracy. So if you get a perfect score for grammatical range and accuracy, it means that you have used a wide range of structures with full flexibility and accuracy, and rare minor errors occur only as slips. So again, this level 9 is very similar to what a native speaker would get. A native speaker can make some mistakes when they're writing, but it would just be a slip. So not a serious mistake. It doesn't mean that I don't understand the word I'm using or I don't understand the grammar that I'm attempting to use, but just a very minor mistake. But I'm using a wide range of grammar for this. It's not just very simple sentences, and it would feel very natural. A score of 8 would be similar, but you're using a wide range of structure. The majority of the sentences are error-free and makes only very occasional errors or inappropriacies. So you're using a very wide range. You have very few errors, and most of your sentences are perfect. Okay, for a score of 7, this would mean that you use a variety of complex structures. You produce frequent error-free sentences, and you have good control of grammar and punctuation, but you're making a few mistakes. For a score of 6, this would mean that you're using a mix of simple and complex sentence forms. So a lot of your sentences are very simple, but you did try the complex ones as well. And then you make some errors in grammar and punctuation, but they don't confuse the reader and they don't confuse the idea that you're trying to convey. A score of 5 would mean that you use a limited range of structures. You try complex sentences, but they're less accurate than your simple sentences. And you might make frequent grammatical errors and punctuation errors, and this can cause the reader to start to be confused. For a score of 4, you would have a very limited range of structures with only rare use of subordinate clauses. So you're using very simple sentences, and rarely you might use slightly more complex sentences. Some structures are accurate, but errors predominate and punctuation is often faulty. So your errors are really frequent at this level, at a level of 4. With a score of 3, this means that you've attempted sentence forms, but errors in grammar and punctuation predominate and distort the meaning. So you are trying, but you have so many grammatical and punctuation errors that it really confuses what you're trying to say. Score of 2, you can't use sentence forms except if you memorize them. And number 1 would be not able to use sentences at all. And then a score of 0, again, you didn't go, you didn't try it, or you only used memorized responses. So now we will get into a few more examples of what these questions on the test can look like. So there are questions that relate to problem solution. So this example is overpopulation of urban areas has led to numerous problems. Identify 1 or 2 serious ones and suggest ways that governments and individuals can tackle these problems. So it is a problem and they want you to try to explain some ways that governments and individuals can solve these problems. Another example of a question that is like a problem solution question would be this. Nowadays, many people have access to computers on a wide basis, and a large number of children play computer games. What are the negative impacts of playing computer games, and what can be done to minimize the bad effects? So again, you have to really pay attention to these questions. Each question is different. They don't use a really standard question form for this part of the test. And so for this one, for example, there are 2 large parts to this question. So what are the negative impacts and what can be done to minimize the bad effects? So if you write your whole essay on the negative impacts, but you don't give any solutions, then you're not going to get a very high score because you haven't covered the question completely. Another problem solution question is, the internet has transformed the way information is shared and consumed, but it has also created problems that did not exist before. What are the most serious problems associated with the internet, and what solutions can you suggest? So again, it has a problem and they're asking for solutions. So they're asking you, what are the most serious problems and what solutions can you suggest? So that's a common form of question where they're asking problems and solutions. Another problem solution. In the developed world, average life expectancy is increasing. What problems will this cause for individuals and society? Suggest some measures that could be taken to reduce the impact of aging populations. So again, they want to know the problems, they want to know some potential solutions, but you have to also pay attention to the fact that when they're asking for problems, they're asking problems for individuals and for society. So don't only focus on individual problems and forget society. You have to show both of those things to have a full, complete answer. So for opinion essays, there are quite a lot of opinion questions on the IELTS writing section. We'll see a few different examples of them. This is one. Advances in technology and automation have reduced the need for manual labor. That's the opinion. Therefore, working hours should be reduced. To what extent do you agree or disagree? So with the opinion that working hours should be reduced because of these advances in technology. So this is a question just about your opinion. And what's important to remember for the opinion essays is to choose a side. So you can give a little bit of information about both sides, but you need to make sure that you have a very clear answer of, I think this is best and this is why, or this is true or this is false. You have to be clear. Okay, another opinion essay question. A growing number of people feel that animals should not be exploited by people and that they should have the same rights as humans. And then it says opposing opinion. While others argue that humans must employ animals to satisfy their various needs, including uses for food and research. Discuss both views and give your opinion. So here they're just showing you which opinions are present. So two opposing opinions. You're going to have to discuss both and give your opinion. So you can talk about what is true or false, or some examples of things that you can think of relating to each of these. Don't just focus on one. You have to mention both. Another opinion question. Some people believe that entertainers are paid too much and their impact on society is negative, while others disagree and believe that they deserve the money they make because of their positive effect on others. Discuss both views and give your opinion. So again, you're asked to talk about both views and your personal opinion. Another opinion question. Many people are copying famous celebrities from magazines and TV. Why is this happening? Do you think it's a good idea to copy celebrities? So your idea, your opinion about if this is a good idea, and don't forget to also say why this is happening. That's one of the two questions that they ask you. Again, with opinions, subjects like arts, music, and drama are more important than other school subjects and therefore should be given more time in the calendar. Do you agree or disagree? So sometimes it's very clear they're just asking agree or disagree. For opinion questions, examples of phrases that can be used to ask for your opinion, because sometimes it's not incredibly clear that it's an opinion question, sometimes it is. So of course, when you see, do you agree or disagree, that's asking for your opinion. Do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? That's again asking for your opinion. What is better? Are there more advantages or are there more disadvantages? A similar question, but with different wording. Are there more benefits or more drawbacks? So the negative or the positive, which is stronger? And then something with do you think or what do you think? And what is your view? And do you think this is a good idea? So if they're asking, do you think that this is true? Do you think something? Then of course they want your opinion, not just something else. It's about you and your views. So there are quite a few questions that will ask you the advantages and disadvantages. So here's one example. People now have the freedom to work and live anywhere in the world due to the development of communication technology and transportation. What are the advantages and disadvantages of this trend? So you have to give your opinion, but not just an opinion in general, but the advantages and disadvantages. You have to show both. Even if you think there are far more advantages, you can't ignore the disadvantages part of the question. You have to include both. So for these types of questions, discuss the advantages and disadvantages in separate paragraphs often, and you can pay attention to whether they asked for your opinion or not. Here they are asking for your opinion. Sometimes they might be asking something a little more specific, but often because there's the question of advantages and disadvantages, you have to be sure to present a developed idea on both. So you don't want to just briefly mention a disadvantage. You should probably have a paragraph that is talking about some disadvantages, even if you think there are more advantages. Disadvantages being asked for in a question is here. Many young people are leaving their homes in rural areas to study or work in the cities. What are the reasons? Do the advantages of this development outweigh its disadvantages? So again, be sure that you cover both of those questions that they're asking you, reasons, also advantages, and also disadvantages. Now, there are some essay questions that we kind of group in a category called complex essay questions, and this would be one example. There are many types of music in the world today. Why do we need music? Is the traditional music of a country more important, and should it be preserved? Or is international music that is heard everywhere nowadays more useful to a society? So these are just a little bit more complex, a little different from the questions that are saying which is better, advantages, disadvantages, or your opinion. So here you have to very carefully read the question because they're asking a few things. So why do we need music? Is traditional music more important? Should it be preserved? Or is international music more useful? So you're covering a few different things. It's more of a broad topic. Another example, demand for food is increasing worldwide. What is the cause of this? What measures can the international community take to meet this demand? So this one doesn't have a lot of questions in it, but it's not a simple give your opinion or benefits, drawbacks, or advantages, disadvantages. So you have to cover the cause and what can the international community do to meet this demand. Another question is, many museums and historical sites are mainly visited by tourists rather than local people. Why does this happen? What can be done to encourage local people to visit museums and historical sites? So don't forget both the why and what can you do to encourage locals. So going to some vocabulary that can be used. There was a mention of linking words and cohesion and coherence. Linking words are things that you can study in advance. Again, you can't study sentences, and I don't recommend that you ever study sentences and try to memorize a sentence to insert. But linking words, you can familiarize yourself with them, because sometimes there are just a couple that we use often, but you want to show a wide range. So these are some examples. So when you're giving examples in your essay, you can say, for example, or for instance, means almost the same. One clear example is, you can say such as, or to illustrate my point, in other words, or in particular. So those are a few different ways you can say some similar things. When you're adding information, you can say things like, of course, and or to, but also in addition, additionally, furthermore, moreover, also, not only, as well as. So don't always say just and or to. Of course, you can use those words in your writing. It would probably be strange if you tried not to. But if you notice that you said and 20 times in your essay, then probably you should try to change that a little so that you can put in a variety. When you're giving results or reasons, you can say things like as a result, because of, consequently, therefore, for this reason, so, or due to the fact that. So again, these are things that if you're always saying so, or if you only say for this reason and you never say anything else, it will start to sound very repetitive. But if you memorize a few of these words and you get comfortable using them correctly in a sentence, then you can start to put some in. But again, remember that in the scoring, it mentioned that you can't overuse things like this either. So if you used all of these words in your essay, it might sound a little unnatural, like you're trying to force them to go into your sentences. But just where it seems correct and natural, you can use a few of them. When you're highlighting information, you can say things like in particular, specifically, especially, clearly, or of course. So to draw the person's attention to this information that you're presenting, those are some phrases and words you can use. To show contrast, you can say things like admittedly, however, despite, in spite of, but, still, although, even though, nevertheless, on the other hand, in contrast, alternatively, and in comparison. So maybe in conversation, you don't use these very much, but in your writing, this can be really helpful. Again, don't use them all the time. If you put all of these words into one short essay, it would sound very strange. But these are really nice tools to be able to insert some contrast and have your sentences sound a little more formal and a little more varied than if you only ever used but or and or. When you're giving opinions, you can say things like in my opinion, but you don't have to always start your sentence with in my opinion. You shouldn't start with that for multiple sentences. You can say things like I think, or I believe, I admit, from my perspective, or I agree with this, or I disagree with this. So be sure that you're not always saying, in my opinion, this, in my opinion, this. There are other ways to say that same type of idea, but with different words. Linking words for conclusions. So a lot of people struggle with this. In conclusion would be one of the more common ways to do it. You can also say to conclude or to sum up. In summary, to conclude, I put there twice, my apologies. In closing and overall. So in conclusion or to conclude are nice ways to end things. In closing sounds quite formal and nice as well. These are just different ways you can say similar ideas. Some strategies for this section of the test are to read the instructions carefully. You can't just skim over these questions. They ask in detail different questions. Some questions might have just one question. Some questions might include 3 different questions in the paragraph. You have to answer all of them if they ask you multiple questions, so be careful. Take some time to plan the content and the structure of your essay. This is really important. You need to make sure that you are planning before you start writing, because there's a whole section of your scoring that's about how coherent and how logical your argument is and how you present it to them. So you have to be sure that you start with an introduction. You have, well, I'll go to the next point. You need an introduction. You need more than one body paragraph, and then you need a conclusion. So usually 4 to 5 paragraphs in total. So the one intro, the one conclusion, and then there can't just be one body. You need more than one. But if you had 6, probably that's too much. It means you're not taking the time to develop each idea thoroughly and clearly. So usually 2 or 3 would be the number of body paragraphs that you need. The introduction of your essay should paraphrase the question. So that just lets them know what you're going to be writing about, and that's something you should practice in advance, is how to paraphrase questions. And then use formal language instead of casual language. So don't write in the same way that you would speak to your friends. You're writing in a way that is formal. So things like you wouldn't say to your friends, therefore, and in conclusion, to sum up, things like that. But those are very common things when you're writing, and it sounds nicer and more formal for writing. Be sure to manage your time and be sure to leave time to proofread. Try not to use up all of your writing time just writing. You need a few minutes at the end to go through. You might have made some really simple, obvious mistakes. You might have made some spelling errors, so you need to give yourself time to go over it at the end. Not an incredibly long time, but a couple of minutes at least. Some general tips for writing. Only give your opinion if they ask for it. If they don't ask for your opinion, such as in task 1, and they're just asking you to present information, don't give your opinion. In the task 2, often they are asking for your opinion, but be sure that they want it before you start to give it. Don't support all sides of an argument if they've asked you to choose one. So if they tell you choose one thing, choose one thing. If they tell you to develop both sides and list all of the advantages and disadvantages, or some of the advantages and disadvantages, do both. If you're taking the paper-based test, don't spend time counting the words on your test day. And then the next point explains this. So practice writing on test paper and see how many words you generally write on each page. So you can find test paper to print online. Do all of your practice essays on the test paper, and then see, just normally when you're writing the way that you would on a test, how many words are on each page. So count it. Then if you know that you always put a certain number of words on one page, then you can just know that on the test to have a good idea of if you've hit the minimum or not. Of course, it's averages, but it would be using your time not so wisely if you're there counting all of your words on the test day. Some people do that, but if you've taken a lot of tests for practice before then, you can save yourself that time because you'll have a really good idea of how many words you've written. Don't use slang or very casual vocabulary. So don't use words that are not appropriate in an academic setting. And avoid repetition. So if you've noticed, for example, that you started every sentence with also or therefore, then that is something that you should go back and try to change. You can't be saying the same thing all the time. It might be the same information, or just you start your sentences in the same way. You should try to have variation. Some ways to prepare are, of course, to write as much as possible, to read as much as possible, especially if you don't have someone to correct your writing. So I always tell people that if they are able to work with a tutor or with someone who can correct their writing, that is great. If you're not able to, or you are able to, but you still want to do a lot of practice away from your tutor as well, reading is really helpful. So you can see sentence structures, you can start to feel what is natural and what sounds correct in someone's writing if you're reading the writing of native speakers. Also read sample essay questions and answers. So if you're reading the essay question and their answers, often it will tell you what their score was as well. So you can start to notice some of the things that they do that makes them lose marks, or some of the things that makes their writing sound really natural or really impressive. So you can kind of start to draw inspiration from those things. Learn vocabulary relating to the types of questions on the test. So you have to try to familiarize yourself with vocabulary. For task 1, for example, you need to be able to explain charts and graphs really well. For both sections of this test, or both tasks from this section, you need to be able to use linking words. You can just look at types of words that are common to use in this type of question, and that will help you to use them more naturally on the test. And then, of course, practice, as much practice as you can do. You should be writing these essay answers many, many times before you do your test. It would be very bad if the first time you ever wrote one was on the test. Even if you read 100 of them before, you should also be writing a lot of them. Writing it yourself is very different from only reading it. So do both. Read examples and also make sure to do the writing yourself. It'll feel less stressful and it'll feel more familiar, and you'll just be better at it for so many reasons if you've already done it for practice. And that is all for the writing section of the IELTS test. So I hope you learned some useful tips, and good luck.